Hi everyone, this is Jim. I played this Blitz game recently that I thought was kind of interesting, so I thought I'd share it with you. And I wanted to say before I get going that I was inspired in this opening by a video I had seen on the Power Play Chess YouTube channel. That's Daniel King's channel, where he was reviewing this game, Kramnik versus Demchenko, which was played in the recent FIDE World Cup. And so I'll put a pointer to that video in the description if you want to check it out. A pretty interesting opening system from Kramnik. And I was sort of following it. So knight f3, Kramnik had white. And so I started out with knight f3. My opponent played knight f6. I went g3. My opponent went d5, which is a very principled way to play. If your opponent is not taking the center, then you should go ahead and take it. And you can see that's the top choice here. And the chess engine already gives black an advantage in this position. But here is the wrinkle, b3. So this is what I saw. I saw that by move 3, Kramnik had already set up a finachetto for both sides. And I realized, there's no really good way for black to prevent this finachetto if white wants to go for it. To prevent it, maybe black could have played the first two moves of g6 and bishop g7. It would have at least slowed it down a little bit if black knew that you were going to play a double fianchetto and was determined to prevent it. But even then, you could play other moves to clog up the diagonal, like d5 and then go ahead or d4 and then go ahead and fianchetto. Anyway, so this is a pretty offbeat system, the double fianchetto, but it's the kind of system you can pretty much always get into, although black will try different setups against it. Anyway, I just wanted to try it out, having seen that video and having some ideas here. So let's see, in this position he went c5, I went bishop, I went bishop b2 here, okay. I think you can play bishop g2 and bishop b2 in either order. Let's see, he went knight c6, and I went d4 here. Okay, yeah, so I delayed this for a while, but I'm going to play that move. I guess I was thinking at some point I need to put a pawn in the center. I guess that's one of the tricks with playing this kind of system, is you can let your opponent put some pawns in the center, but at some point you've got to start throwing some pawns up there yourself. So at this point we're just out of the opening book, and let's go through the initial moves here. It's like I said, the chess engine kind of likes black in these openings, and the same thing was true in the Kramnik game, but somehow after a few moves, maybe the chess engine is just not really looking ahead far enough and not realizing that white is going to be able to get an equal share of the center at least, or something, just by virtue of having the extra move and not wasting time. You're not wasting moves. You're just taking a little extra time to place your bishops on these fianchettos. So a little bit slower than a usual system. Anyway, but somehow it always seems to end up with a slight white edge after a while. But the position here, let's see, I played knight bd2. So, aside from setting up the fianchetto, I haven't really wasted a lot of time. I've spent one move developing each of the minor pieces, and I've castled, and I've got a stake in the center. So it's all about even up to this point. It looks like, so black's next move is actually a mistake, and white has an edge after that. It looks like black was concerned about me taking on c5 and black wasting a tempo with this bishop. So if black just did a normal developing move, I probably would take here and force him to move the bishop again and then strike with c4. That's kind of the game plan here. And maybe there's a little edge for white after that sequence. But the chess engine says that black can maintain equality here and deal with this problem in a different way, just by exchanging here. Take that pawn on d4, take here, and after I take back, well, now it's black's turn to move. Now black can develop this bishop without any fear that there'll be any tempo wasting exchange on c5, because that pawn is just gone, and then castle kingside, and it looks like black will have a very normal game at this point, and probably pretty even. So instead of that, my opponent found another way to deal with the problem of the the problem of this bishop and then the time-wasting move, which is he castled queenside. And at this point, white has a pretty significant edge, kind of interestingly. But it's always risky to castle queenside after you've played this c5 move, particularly when there's pawns in the center and lines can open up pretty quickly. So yeah, it's just an awkward position for black. His king is never really going to be completely safe. I meant to mention that instead of d5, Kramnik's opponent went with d6 and a king's Indian setup. So it was really a different game from this point. But anyway, yeah, I was just inspired to play this double fianchetto setup by watching that video. So that's the connection. Anyway, so after he castled, I went ahead and took here because, well, I'm not so worried about gaining a tempo on the bishop. I'm more worried about opening up lines towards his king. And I think this is the correct decision here. And then I punch with c4. And now he played a good move here. My opponent, well, you can see our ratings here. I have a slight edge. We've actually played a number of times on Lichess, and my score against him is I have 7 wins and he has 5 wins. So we're pretty evenly rated, and he's beaten me, 5 times. So he's got some good ideas here. But like all of us, he makes mistakes too. And he pushed on with d4, so I think this was good. Keeping lines closed and gaining a little more space and trying to prove that my slow development here has made things a little bit awkward. But I want to just push on the queen side. That was one of the themes of the Kramnik game, was that he had this double fianchetto setup, and then he just started throwing his queenside pawns forward. Pretty interesting play, and he got an edge over here. In that game, black castled kingside. Let's see, he went with e5, just shoring up his center, and went with b4, kicking the bishop. And he dropped the bishop back to e7. And, well, another thing is that by playing this unusual way, not a standard way, you throw your opponent back on their own resources a little bit. They're forced to think on their own. Of course, you're forced to think on your own too, but by this time my opponent had accumulated some kind of deficit on the clock, so I was ahead on the clock. And this was played at a fast time control of 5 minutes with a 3-second increment, which is their one of their standard blitz time controls on Lichess. Anyway, I was eyeing this e4 square here. I thought that might be a nice square for my pieces, and I found, I think, a nice way to get to it. I played this move, knight to g5. It's a move that comes with tempo, because I'm threatening to take on f7 here and fork the two rooks, and then and I can use that tempo to get my knight here very quickly. It also opened up that diagonal for the bishop, so that was I think a nice maneuver. He went with bishop e6, which is not the most accurate move. So here's the second mistake from black, really. He should have just gone with rook h to f8. And I still have an edge, but not as big as I do after the game move. He went bishop e6. And, well, I can just take that off. And I do. So I gain the bishop pair. I give him some doubled pawns. It gives him an open f-file, so maybe he has ideas of attacking on the f-file. But this point is very secure, so I'm not so worried about an f-file attack. And I get this e4 square for my knight. Of course, he can trade it off. And in fact, the chess engine recommends that. It would just go ahead and take that knight immediately and play on this position. But it looks like white has a pretty good edge there as well. No edge in material other than the bishop pair advantage, but I think my pieces are just a little better organized and placed. Let's see. He went rook h to f8 now, putting the rook on the open file, and I went ahead with c5. So c5 is not the best move for me. So the best way for me to pursue my advantage here is a move I didn't think of at all during the game. So I missed this opportunity. I had it here and for the next several moves. And that's the move knight to g5. It's a nice idea. It's looking at this backwards pawn. You know, when you ever see a pair of doubled pawns, the backwards pawn of the two is often the one that's hardest to defend, oddly enough, because, well, it has no pawns. The other pawns have all gone forward, and there's no neighboring pawn on one side, and on the other side the pawn has gone forward. So it can only be supported by pieces. So you should always think about that as a potential target. And so maybe if I'd thought of that, I would have come up with this idea. But knight g5, say queen d7 to hold on to it for a bit, and bishop h3. and I'm just going to break through there. He can't hold on to that anymore. So interesting idea there that I just missed. So I went on with c5. I was looking at the squares around the king, so that was kind of my focus. Yeah, plus in a fast time control game, you really don't have a chance to look at all of the ideas in the position. This knight g5 idea, that's something I might find very well, could find in a slow game, but in a blitz game, you tend to just kind of go with your original plan. So c5, just trying to take squares away from the king. I was also eyeing the idea of just sacrificing a pawn there. Place the knight there with check, and if he takes it, I take back with a pawn. He can take the pawn, but it opens up the c file. So I was thinking of a pawn sacrifice on that square. Let's see, he played a6. I went queen d2. I wanted to kind of set things up a little bit. I wanted to connect my rooks and put some rook on c1 to strengthen this knight d3 idea. And I wasn't quite sure which rook at this point. Let's see, he went knight to a7, so looking to maneuver his knight around, and I end up putting the a rook here on the c file. And let's see, he played knight to d5, getting this knight to a good square. And now I went in for this idea, knight d6 check. And yeah, if he takes, I'll take back, and there's a pin on the queen and the king, so he just can't take it at all. But he moves the king aside, and after this, he really can take the pawn. Can take the knight. I wasn't quite sure the sacrifice was really worth it at this point, so I dropped the knight back to c4, and I'm just looking at, there's just a lot of good squares around here where the knight might go to, so I'm just kind of keeping this idea in reserve for the moment. Let's see, he went knight b5, and I went a4 to kick that knight. So let's back up. Instead of a4, the strongest move for me here was to play e3. What's this? Oh, yeah, that's right. I thought about this during the game, actually. I wanted to play e3. It's kind of a natural move here to weaken this pawn structure that he has in the center. And I really just wasn't sure about it because he's got this rook against the queen. But the chess engine says, yes, e3 is actually the best move here. And so, for example, if he takes it, I didn't spot this idea, but there's a clever tactical idea here. Instead of taking back with the knight, of course I can't take with the queen because his knight is guarding it. I would have to take with the knight or the pawn. It says take with the pawn, and then if he tries some clever move, say knight f4, opening up some discovered attack on my queen and wanting to trade off this good bishop on g2. This is the kind of thing I was afraid of. Chess engine says this is nothing to be afraid of at all, and in fact, white is winning after queen c2, knight takes g2. You trade rooks, and then you play bishop takes e5. That was a tactical idea I missed, but it's very nice. So that's why you keep the knight here. You take with the pawn, keep the knight here, and this bishop, which was just kind of lurking back here on b2, has suddenly sprung to life on the e5 square and skewering the queen and king. So a very nice tactic. So anyway, that was not best play for black, but it just shows that while I was afraid of playing this e3 move because I didn't have, because it would open up this file. I was afraid of opening up this file against my queen, but the other point is, which you can see now that I've illustrated it, is that it's opening up this diagonal for my knight and my bishop to coordinate against the king and queen here. So yeah, it's a good example of missing a tactical pattern, but pretty nice line from the computer. Anyway, I went a4. This still keeps an edge for white, so I'm just playing on kind of positionally and missing a couple of these tactical ideas, which of course happens a lot in blitz. Let's see, he went knight b to c3, and now's the point that we're coming to the exchange sacrifice. And I was very, one of the reasons I decided to look at this game afterwards with a chess engine was because I wanted to check my feeling about the exchange sac, because you have to make this sacrifice based on your judgment. You don't have time to calculate all the lines in the blitz games, and it turns out to be entirely correct. So I traded it off he took, and now is the point where I play rook takes knight, and that's the exchange sack I put in the title. And I think it's this kind of thing you can of course calculate the lines, but it's also one of those things you can just look at and somewhat instinctively say this is probably a good exchange sack. So for one point, I'm not going to play it right now, but let's try and look at the position on the board and see if we can visualize all this. After I take the knight and he takes back and I grab the pawn, I get one pawn for the exchange, and the exchange is only worth about 1.5 pawns, so I've already got a lot of compensation. I've left him with these doubled isolated pawns in the center, so they're a perpetual source of weakness. And if you look at my remaining pieces, you can imagine a rook here, queen here, and knight here, and bishop here along this long diagonal. I have really great pieces, and his pieces are all back around his king, and they're not. Well, I guess the bishop is particularly a terrible piece. The rooks have open files, or the rooks have a fair amount of scope, and the queen is over here doing a good job defending. The bishop is really the bad piece, but that combination of getting a pawn for the exchange plus having more active pieces, and also the active pawns I have over here rushing towards his king, seems pretty clear that this was worth the exchange sack. And also, well, the other thing to think about when you're contemplating an exchange sack is, can you work around this piece? Sometimes, there's this annoying knight or this annoying bishop that you want to get rid of, and there's just no way to work around it. If sometimes you can just leave it there and maneuver your pieces around it and still have a good game, but other times, it's just in your way. So take it off. That's my advice. And the chess engine verifies that was actually rook takes c3 was really the best move in the position at that point. So even the chess engine didn't find a better way to proceed there. So yeah, now we can see the position. I mean, I've got a little pressure on the center here, but I'm not so interested in winning pawns. I'm more interested in pushing the attack. So I'm not going to grab that pawn. In fact, that would just lead to trades, and I'm not sure if that would be. It might just be that my initiative peters out. I think with these pawns and the queen on the board, I have a good kingside attack initiative. So anyway, he played bishop f6, not only defending the pawn, but also maybe threatening to push that pawn with tempo. So I dropped my queen back to c2. That was not the most accurate move. I realized even during the game a better square for the queen would be over here on b3, because I want to support these pawns as they go forward. But anyway, I played queen c2. It was still a good move. He went h6 here. Not quite sure what that's about. Maybe he's preparing to push these pawns forward, or maybe just was running out of ideas. I went rook to c1. So, and at this point I was starting to realize, if I had my queen here on the b file and the rook on the c file, I would be much better prepared to start pushing those pawns. Let's see. He went rook to d4. Cancel that. Went rook to d4, harassing my knight. And I played e3 now. So I'm not playing it at a point where I win any pawns, but that was just an annoying rook there. I just wanted to chase it back. It dropped back to d7. I didn't think it had any great squares over here, although, yeah, it can't go to the f file, so it would probably just end up getting trapped over here. So dropping back is the right thing. And then right here is another good example of a breakthrough move that I missed. But this is also the kind of thing I might find in a slow game where I had more time to think about it, because I was even considering this move c6, but I just wasn't sure and didn't have time to calculate it out. But this is a great way to open up lines. I mean, the thing I was worried about was that he's got his queen on that file already, and it might just lead to exchanges. But this turns out to be good. He should probably take, and then I go knight a5, and the pawn supporting the knight, and then going after this c pawn with the bishop, the knight, and so he's just falling apart over here on the king side. So that's a really good move. Let's see. If instead of taking he tried rook d to f7, and I just push on with b5, and once again I'm just kind of overwhelming him here on the king side. I guess I wasn't thinking about the move knight c6. I was thinking about the move knight a5 first, followed by c6, which is probably not as accurate a way to play, and I eventually discarded it. And I just went with knight to d6. But, well, the disadvantage of this move is it lets him give the exchange back. So after this, the material has evened out. But actually, I'm a pawn up because I managed to either capture one of these weak pawns or hold on to my pawn. But in every line, I end up a pawn up. Let's see. The chess engine thinks best play is for black to go ahead and take the queen off. And then rook to c8, opposing rooks, and I go rook to d2, keeping the rook on and holding on to this this advanced pawn for the moment. And notice this situation, the bishops are of opposite color, but the rooks are still on the board, so it's not necessarily a drawish endgame, and white has an advantage here. Although the advantage is not as clear as if I had played that c6 move, and it leads to a clear win for white. So this knight d6 and allowing him to sacrifice back the exchange, which also was the best move here, then this is just not as good for me. So let's see. He took with the queen. I went queen e4. I mean, I was still very happy with my position. I have this, and eventually he decided he had to block with the queen here, so I end up winning a pawn this way. But in other lines, it seems because of the weakness of his doubled pawns here, it seems I always will end up a pawn up. And so that's the highlights of the game. Let's just go forward. I hold on to my bishop here with the pawn and then bring my king over. But this is now just end game. I keep all my pawns. He was harassing him. He maneuvers his bishop around, and I start coordinating with the bishop and the rook against some of his weaknesses over here. And this is why when rooks are still on the board that can coordinate with the bishop, this is why opposite colored bishops are not so drawish, is because you do have these chances, this kind of coordination that is hard for your opponent to defend against because his bishop is the wrong color. So these opposite colored bishops with rooks or other heavy pieces still on the board tends to favor the side that's attacking. Anyway, he defends creatively here with the rook b6, still holding on to that pawn and attacking my pawn. So that's why I had to bring my king up first. But I can move my king here, hold on to the pawn, which I was also attacking here, but I didn't want to. I wanted to keep these pawns until I've inflicted some more pawn damage over here. So I gave black time to save his pawn. And now I push on with a5. And I think this is the key point where the endgame really turns in my favor, because his rook really runs out of squares at this point. He tries to hold on to everything, but now my rook can come over and start mopping up pawns. Let's see. We continue on, but it's pretty straightforward at this point. I just stay a couple of pawns up, and now he's because his rook is sort of imprisoned over here, it has no squares to go to. I can just push my pawn forward, and after a few more moves, let's see, how far did we get? Oh yeah, he was bringing his rook. He was trying to go after this pawn. He needed to maneuver his bishop around to coordinate with his rook against my pawn. But yeah, well, this was played in a tempo. It was played very fast, and of course he just missed that I could take his bishop. It just was a little. He was just a little behind. He needed to maneuver his bishop around a little more to coordinate against my weaknesses. And so I was just that advantage of tempo with the rook and the bishop. I was able to coordinate against his weaknesses before he could do that to mine. And that decided the game. So he resigned at this point. I was about to queen. Anyway, interesting game, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Now that concludes the chess-related portion of this video. I wanted to add one other thing on the end, which is kind of a special request. So if you're interested, keep listening. I have this other channel. It's called Jim Plays Go, and it's a very small channel in terms of the viewership and the subscribers, which is nothing that bothers me. But this year, Google changed the rules for small channels, and unless you have at least 10,000 views, you don't get any revenue on those videos. You don't get any advertising. They don't place any ads on those videos, and so you don't get any advertising revenue. Now, we're not talking about a huge amount of money. We're talking about pennies, basically. But I always liked getting a little bit of revenue. I got some revenue from this channel even when I was just starting. And anyway, the cutoff is 10,000 views, cumulative views on the channel before they will start placing videos on it. And I'm only up to around 7,000 views, so I have a little ways to go on that channel. So anyway, if you want to do me a favor, maybe you can go and watch some of the videos on my Jim Plagueis Go channel. I have a couple of playlists. I'll put links to them on the screen here. And there's one, if you don't know anything about Go, I have a beginning Go playlist where I start, video number 1 is called Absolute Beginner. I go over the rules and I give examples, and that's a playlist around 25 or 30 videos, and so it takes you from absolutely nothing to being able to play a game of Go. And then I have another playlist called a Double Digit Q. The Q is a reference to your rating in Go, and a double digit Q is not such a great rating, but it's where you start out. You start out somewhere in the 20s. I've managed to work my way up to around the rankings in go down. So you start what the Qs you start with around the 20s, and I've worked my way down to 15. And your goal is to get from the double digits down to the single digits. And then when you get down to 1 Q, you can cross over to the Dan levels, and that's where you start getting really strong. And then the stronger players are rated from 1 Dan up to 9 Dan. And then there's actually a separate ranking for professionals. Those are amateur Dan rankings, and then there's also professional Dan rankings, which are even stronger, but they also go from 1 to 9. Anyway, that's a little bit aside about the rating. So the beginning Go playlist is for absolute beginners. The double digit Q playlist, I have a lot of games that I play there. I just do play some games with live commentary, and I also have random videos in there where I try to figure out different things about corner invasions and what works and what doesn't. So if you're in the mood and have some time, maybe you can go and check out some of those videos and learn a new game. So see you guys later. Bye.